Hello, hello. I'm Dakota.
And I'm Curtis.
Welcome back to RSQ. We finished reading Arcanics, Dark Times by A.E. Mosier. We're going to do our open and honest review. To be upfront before we start the review, this book wasn't for us. Both of us, in our short form review, we said that we don't really recommend this book, and we have a hard time recommending this book, and we weren't the biggest fans of this book, but we want to still go category by category and talk about some pros and cons of each of our categories and just give our open and honest feedback of how we felt.
We're going to give it the old RSQ rating like we would do for any book because integrity is important. So we're going to be honest about you with all the books that we read, and because that's important to us and to you, because we don't want to recommend something that you're reading and you're like, why would these nincompoops recommend this to me? So
It's true. We don't mind giving an open and honest review, and this is an indie author, so that's definitely worth taking into account for reading when you're looking at the review. But we always hope that others are honest with us about why we should or shouldn't read books. So we want to do that with you. So to dive right in to our first category,
Let's do it.
Character development.
Character
Where we land on that.
development. I gave this one a half a point. Reason I give it a half a point was we got quite a bit of characters, and they all got, I feel like, a decent amount of screen time. For our little band of college age.
Yeah.
They're college age. Yeah, they're on like a dormitory.
18, 19, fresh out of high school.
Somewhere around there. They got a nice little merry band. I just felt like even though we got some characters and they did go through some like events during the book and different scenarios that I felt like should have changed them, I felt like there wasn't any character development really at all kind of thing with these characters. So it was nice to get some like different characters that kind of like bounced off each other. But unfortunately, I feel like they didn't grow from any of that, from that bouncing. And then the other thing is with the main character, like academic, like to a T is his character flaw, right? Like he's really into his schooling. And he gets confronted about it and he makes it his whole personality, this whole academic thing. And he gets confronted, but doesn't change. Like he just still stays the same. So it's like it was built up to be this thing where he's about to overcome it and he just doesn't. So I was just like, yeah, nah,
Yeah.
nah.
Yeah. We both give this one a half a point. I agree. I thought that for the pro, there was appropriately sized cast of characters for the size of this book. They got plenty of screen time. I didn't feel like we had too many people or not enough people, but I do agree that they weren't well developed and that the main character, I feel like he was pretty unlikable. And I didn't see him grow to a point that he was likable. And so I think you dig yourself a bit of a proverbial hole when you write a main character that's not likable. You have work to do when you dig that hole, and you can dig yourself out of it with character growth. But when you don't grow them enough to be likable, it's tough.
It's tough too when you have the other characters like kind of calling out the things that he does poorly. So they're negative for calling him out, but then he doesn't resolve it. So all the characters are negative. So it just feels like everybody's complaining though.
Yeah, it's like, hey, be happy.
Be happy. No. Well,
No.
we're not happy about you not being happy. But so that's where we landed
So,
on that. Half point each.
yep.
Originality and creativity. I think Dakota landed him and I landed at the same on this, and gave it a 0. And I'm gonna let Dakota talk about this one because he's experienced it.
Experience. Yeah. So he told us up front that a big inspiration for this book was The Magicians TV show and book. And I didn't feel like I had anything that was new that wasn't already something we'd seen in that show or book or in like your run of the mill Magic Academia book, like Magic School trope. I didn't feel like we really had anything that set this book apart as far as like unique setting, unique spells, unique magic, unique. The world felt too similar for me. It felt too much like I was reading or watching The Magicians. And so it didn't stand out in originality or creativity. So I unfortunately had to give it a 0 here.
And I think you talked about this in our short form where you talked about how there's a line between taking inspiration from something and essentially taking too much from that thing, and now you're basically just a fanfic.
Yeah.
Is that line. And from when we were talking about the book as we were reading it, it's every time like a major plot thing happened, Dakota would be like, wait, this was on the show type thing. Like the goggles at the college fair and the whole comic book sequence thing where, hey, this was a whole comic, or like our lives are a comic or something like
Yeah.
that.
There were definitely a few topics, main ideas, plot points in the book that I felt like were too similar to the show and Book of the Magicians, and I was like, wait a second, that's like really really similar to something that happened there. And so I think that like you can take inspiration, but if your plot points are lining up, then it's, I don't know, for me it's a little much, right? Like that's really cool that you put into a story, that you put that into your story, but for me it's not necessarily my cup of tea when it's like that.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you when you market it as, oh, I draw inspiration from this. It I feel like you have to market this as kind of like a fanfic almost if you're going to
Yeah.
be that similar, which
Yeah.
is fine, but that's just not how this is
And
presented.
again, this is just our thoughts and how we felt about it. We're not trying to put the author down. We just want to be honest with our thoughts about the book.
Story end and wrap up. Satisfying
Yeah.
ending. It
Uh
did not feel satisfied. I felt that the story ended. Um, I guess the main arc, with the big baddie, I can't remember her name, something with a D, Demetrius or something, um, ended. Uh, I was kind of lost on how we got there and why we were battling these people to begin with. So it ended, and I was just like, okay, like I guess it's over.
yeah.
So I
I
got to a half a point.
Yeah, I didn't give it a half point. I gave it a 0 here. I felt like um I felt like the plot points that ended the story were not plot points that I was introduced to along the way. So when the story ended with those, I was like, but that ending is like, I mean, exactly what you said. How do we get here? Like, why are these the relevant endings? So I gave it a 0. And I felt like the plot point we had was we weren't introduced to it until really late in the book. So it was confusing. And this touches a bit on structure, which we'll talk about more later, but I gave this one a 0 and you gave it a half point.
I did. Yep.
World building or setting. I gave this one a 1 because one of the things I really pay attention to when we're reading is if I can imagine the room the character's in. And if that is a yes, like if there is specific language telling me what the character is seeing or what the character is experiencing, I give it more points than less points. So for me, I did feel like he was explaining the settings that the characters were in. I feel like when the characters moved from different locations and ended up in different realms, I felt like that was explained. So I am giving him a positive here. I felt like he did flesh out the setting in my eyes.
I struggled with this one a little bit. I initially gave it a 0, but I think I'm giving it a half a point. And this is because, like you said, when we were in an area, I understood the area in the room we were in. Like I could picture, oh, we're in like the dorms, and like it was described well when they were in like the foresty area. I got all that, but the setting to me was kind of maybe not the setting. The world building was kind of non-existent, in my opinion. The magic system, I had no idea what was going on. How did they get these powers? Who knew about these powers? Because they were in high school and some of the people knew, but some of them didn't. There was no like foundation for me to build off. It was kind of like they were trying to do like an assumed knowledge thing that you get along the way. Since we never got the knowledge, we just kind of started off on like level 3 or 4. And it's like we skipped the tutorial. And I was like, but this was a really important tutorial that I needed because I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
playing.
And I'm gonna stand by my 1 point, but in the future, I probably need to start looking more about the overall building of the world and not just the setting. So kind of how we split like meaningful themes and depth. I probably need to look like half a point for setting and half point for world building, because realistically, I think it is twofold, right? Not just the settings being built out, but the world's being built out. And I think that probably one of the reasons I have an easier time with my thought palace, my theater of the mind for this one, is unfortunately, positively unfortunately, because it felt a lot like Magicians to me.
And I
So
hadn't
like,
read or seen that. So you're like, oh, it's like this. And I'm like, I'll believe you, but I do not know what is going.
yeah, so when Fitz casts the spell in the very beginning of the book where he's making his book float, I thought it was I had really mixed feelings about that. It was cool that he described like what Fitz did with his fingers to like make this to cast the spell. The positive is like, cool, you did that. negative is like the explanation was like exactly how spells are cast in the magicians in like the
Mm,
book and show. And then a future negative, I don't think we got a lot more of that. And I think he paid really close attention to explaining how Fitz cast that spell, and I don't think he did that many times in the book. So
okay.
it was a bit of an inconsistency in that it happened, but then it didn't happen anymore, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, maybe you have to have watched before you read this, and like we preface it that way
Yeah,
because I just felt so lost.
it didn't I will say that doesn't really help with the foundational issues. Like we don't really know how Fitz and his family know about magic. Are they born like was their whole family a long line of magicians? That wasn't really explained. It We don't
Yeah,
really know like how far back it goes. They briefly talked about like who has magic. Everybody has it. Not everybody knows about it, which is like also similar to the show. Like in the show, pretty much anyone can tap into magic, but the general public doesn't know about magic. So
fair enough.
it was it's like you said. I think it doesn't help with the foundational issues for the book, but it did help with my theater of the mind.
I think where I really struggled with this book is in our next category with structure and pacing. I gave
Yeah.
it a half a point, and I feel like I should have given it 0, which sounds harsh, but the pacing I feel like was saved because there was so many things that happened. Like we went from big thing, like little time in between, another big thing, little time in between. Problem was there was no structure to it, really kind of at all. So it kind of just felt like things were happening and I had no idea why we were even there, why they were happening. And then the characters would move on kind of like they didn't just do all of this. And then we move on to the next big thing. I'm like, are we not going to grow or learn or do anything from this? And they're like, yeah, but we're on to like the next big problem. I don't know. I just felt like to me, it felt like we wanted a bunch of cool things to happen. So we wrote the cool things that happened and the stuff that happened in between didn't matter. And that's kind of, I feel like where the book, because the structure wasn't so good, this is kind of how we fell apart.
Yeah, and I mean I agree with everything you said. I this one did feel like a 0 because I feel like the structure was so rough. But it had a redeeming quality in that the pacing it moved quick. There's so many things going on there, so many different like action scenes. Something was always happening. So that I did score half a point for pacing, like you said there. But I I think that and this was an example you used while we were reading. If I think if he was like storyboarding, he like put on the board all these things that he wanted to write into the book, but they didn't necessarily connect. And so that was the most difficult thing I think about the structure is we had all these things that didn't connect to other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Emotional impact, I think, is our next one here. Uh,
Yeah,
how you feeling here?
yeah, we both. I don't know. I don't have much to say redeeming, unfortunately, about emotional impact. But
I think what we
you
can
have
say
it or you
here
don't.
is we did connect to the characters. We didn't feel the characters developed at all. The story was kind of all over the place structure wise. So we weren't able to connect to things. We felt like we were just reading stuff that was happening. So emotional impact can't really have happened. Like
Yep.
there's no way for that to,
It's too deeply woven into too many other points that we didn't feel like the book did well on that we didn't have enough of an emotional connection.
yeah. So we'll move on from that one and go to writing style and prose, Dakota. How are we feeling?
Yeah, this was another one we disagreed on. I gave it a 1 here. I to me and obviously there's some I think you can give some leeway to indie authors when it comes to like grammatical errors and typos. But I will say I didn't feel like there were many of those here. There wasn't any big grammatical errors that took away from the overall writing. And the prose was digestible. It didn't feel like I couldn't read it and like it was too complicated and too wordy and too it didn't feel like I couldn't keep up, you know?
Yeah, I unfortunately gave it a 0 here. Um, or no, I gave it a half a point, excuse me. In terms of like grammatical error, there's only a couple and it's like whatever. And he edited this himself, which is something super difficult to edit your own book without having their eyes on it. So points for that
Yeah.
because that's super difficult to do. Um, but then I just felt like the writing was kind of all over. Like he got really into the action points. Um, but there wasn't enough description there for me, so it just kind of felt like he wanted the big thing to happen and was excited to get to the next thing. So it just felt like the writing style was a little bit more difficult for me to get a hold of.
Yeah.
So that's what we give it for writing style and prose. Is I gave it half point. Dakota gave it one. So engaging storyline. We did agree here.
Yeah, this was a tough one. We both were frequently texting each other about it was I think part of what made this happen was part of what made this tough was the pacing. So much happened, but we didn't feel like it had a clear storyline. So we were frequently texting each other and we were like, what happened? Why are we here? Wait, how did we get here? What's going on here? What did we miss?
It was big, like, it was nice to be able to buddy read because you could bounce things off each other. Like, what did I miss something here or was it not here type thing? And I think, again, the overarching problem, I think if the structure would have been uh better for this book, I think a lot of these other points would have like fell into place for us. For me. Um so yeah, I didn't vibe with the storyline all that much. I just felt like I was reading stuff that was happening to a dude. So it
Same.
just wasn't for me. Meaningful themes and depth, I gave this one a 0. I just
I gave this one a 0 too.
yeah, I just felt like things were happening, none of it kind of meant anything. It didn't seem like the characters kinda cared what was happening. I don't know. It just didn't seem like because the characters didn't grow, there was nothing for them to learn from, so there was no divisive plots. Um, I just didn't I don't know. It just wasn't there for me. Maybe there's some deeper themes I didn't see. I very well could have missed it, but I did not. I didn't find this very deep, and I didn't see any themes worth pointing out.
Yeah, I there were a couple of themes that I think started to tried to bubble to the surface that I think it goes back to what we said earlier. We weren't connected to the characters, we weren't connected to the storyline, and we felt like the structure was all over the place. So we without some critical development, we don't get those themes really fleshed out. Like a couple that I think he wanted to put in here. One was like I think found family, the like group that the college students like put together and like them like taking care of each other and like being there for each other. I think he wanted to have found family, and I think he also wanted to have like a theme of like life experience versus like academics and like the main character. It's like we said, we didn't see the main character grow and overcome this theme. I like there was a subtle mention, there's subtle nods towards like, hey, like it's important to have life experiences and to love your people and not just be reading books and doing your schoolwork all the time. So I think those themes wanted to be there, but I gave it a 0 because I don't think we saw enough development for those themes to really be there.
Yeah. I got nothing else to say about that. And then rereadability and lasting impact. I also gave this a 0. I I just I didn't vibe with it. I wouldn't reread it. And lasting impact. It just wasn't there for me.
Yeah, I think this is a hard category for a book that we're not digging because this is a category that's like guaranteed for a book we're liking and guaranteed to be a 0 for a book that we're not really vibing with because we didn't have enough connection to the book to want to come back to it. And we didn't fall in love with it enough for the world to stick with us.
So with all that being said, I think in terms of RSQ recommended, I personally don't think that we can recommend the book. And that's just because of what we experienced while we were reading it. It just wasn't for me. And if you're a fan of what I like to read from all of our other videos, then I'm not sure you'd be a fan of this.
Yeah, they're all of it's just our opinions. So if you like what we recommend, you might if you like what we recommend, you probably will not enjoy this book. If you typically don't agree with us, maybe you'll enjoy this book.
That's the fun part about reading. It is subjective for the most part.
We're
So
just a
just
couple of
because
dudes.
we're just a couple of dudes doing a thing on camera, and that sounds. I'd like to retract everything I just had, or
Only side
just
quest.
only side quest.
Readers fans.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. I mean, this might be for you. It wasn't for us. Take that, leave it, hate us for it, love us for it, whatever you want. We're just here to talk about books in front of your face.
Here we are.
The other thing I wanted to point out, I wrote this down, forgot to talk about it. There was, and this is an overarching thing. I don't know if the author wanted us to see this or not, and I could just be reaching here. But so the book is called Arcanics, Dark Times. And there's a plot point where the characters find out that everything they're doing is being made into a comic in another dimension. So people are reading about their lives. That's all. And the comic is called Arcanics. So to me, since this keeps hopping from like thing to thing without much in the middle, like it kind of felt like each big thing that happened could have been like a comic issue. Like the first thing, them going to school, was like comic issue number one. And like, I don't know, whatever the next thing was that happened would be like comic issue number two, kind of like an actual comic would be. So, like, if you read this like a comic, you wouldn't have like a lot of middle stuff because after the big thing happened, everything would be forgotten. You'd be in a new issue. If that was the case, it'd be kind of cool. If I'm reaching here, then I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
something I saw. It was interesting
it
to
could
take.
definitely go that way if that was the case, and you end up structuring it. If you end up structuring it like that later, that would be really cool. I think that'd be really unique. But it's tough having it all right in a book and not seeing that structure. It's like, is that the case? Or is it not the case?
So on that note, I think our combined score average is a 2.75 out of 10 on the RSQ scale. And that is Arcanic Dark Times. So that's the review. Next up, we've already spun the wheel. We have 5028 Sonata of Fate is going to be the next book that we are reading and reviewing. So check that out. And what you got, Dakota? I think that.
We also have our author interview with LK
Oh,
Wintur, the writers of The Engineer's Mechanic posted. So check that out too. That was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed sitting down with them. We gabbed for like 2 hours about their book.
shame on me for not plugging that. I thought this was going to be a quick, like, half-hour interview. It was our first one. I was nervous. And yeah, we talked for 2 hours. It was a ton of fun. They're awesome people. The book was fantastic. So if that's if you want to see an interview with an indie author and kind of like break down their process a little bit and kind of see about the world that they built, or you just want to hear us talk for 2 hours with some fun people, check us out. We're cool. We're hip,
We're fun. We're hot and hip.
hot and hip, hot girl summer. Anyway,
But that's all for this one.
but that's all, folks. All right. RSQ out.